Let's do it. Let's go. Let's fly.
So I heard that over the past week, you've been talking about, I mean, obviously your talks have been grounded in the feminine as usual, but what are these things that we want out of life? And I think that's a broader question than just for women. You know, what do men want out of their lives? And are we, by adhering to the things that society says that we want, in a sense, under bargaining for what we can possibly get? I think, yeah. So I think that's also true with politics. We don't have to go there yet. If we can, though, if you want. But like, you know, let's just expand that thought.
In terms of people, so you're talking about the bargain bin? Is that the...
Either the bargain bin or like, you know, you're given a couple of choices and you just feel like you have to choose one, even though neither may be perfectly fit. Me and Lindsay are going to do an expanded discussion after this on that, because she's done the deep dive research on political choice and that type of thing. But, you know, what are we bargaining for versus what do we really want?
Right. So there's a Dr. Robert Donalds does this great exercise. And what he does is he says, over here, there's a man who's building a house. And over here, this man has burned down a house, right? And you go to them and you say, what are you doing and why? Well, he says, okay, I'm building this house because I want security. And he says, oh, I burned down the house for insurance money because I needed a certain kind of security. Then you go up and what ends up happening is they look different for a period of time, but then you get to the higher order desires and they all want love. They all want freedom. They all want acceptance. They all want belonging. And we just have different ways of going about it. And so the thing that I think we miss is everybody wants those things. Everybody. There's nobody who doesn't want to get out of their own suffering. Nobody. And then the natural realization when somebody gets out of their own suffering is they want everybody out of suffering. Right. If only because it's a drug. I'm joking. But that's just the natural thing, because how you get out of suffering is you realize you're interconnected. So then once you realize that, then you look around and you just say, oh, these are just the methods that other people are using to get the exact same thing that I want. And then you can see which are skillful and which aren't. And by skillful meaning, does it actually get you to the destination of the higher order sensations that you're looking for? Does it work? Many of them don't. And there are so many. When I was growing up, there was this place called the Winchester Mystery House. It was incredible. It was this house and it was built. Her husband had died and she was afraid that the house was filled with ghosts. So she'd build the house with a door that just opened to a brick wall. She was trying to trick the ghosts. And so you go around and there's all these like secret, things. And that's sort of how we've built our house, our cultural house. And so we don't know which things actually get us there. And so then you have to get a set of principles that in any domain get you the result, so that you don't ever have to look at the content. What are the principles that you could apply to money, to power, to sex, to relationship, all of the things that we think matter, right? A set of principles that will get you all the way through to the end result that you're looking for from each of those, be it security, be it a feeling of expression, be it a feeling of inspiration, being enlivened.
Understood. So then let's just talk like a general approach, right? Let's just say, okay, I know in advance that I have these goals. Like I do feel like I want security. I do feel like I want significance. I mean, you can even take the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And let's just go down one path. Let's just say that I believe that if I go to school and become a corporate lawyer, then I will achieve, these things: prominence, wealth, significance. And I start going down the path. So then there's certain sort of like challenging things that happen along these paths. okay, maybe it's expensive. Okay, maybe you have to work all the time. Okay, maybe you have to represent interests and spend a lot of time doing things that you don't want to do.
Right.
And then those compromises start to eat away at the principle. So like you end up spending years doing this, like almost the opposite of what you want to do. You end up spending years doing that. So I'm just speaking from personal experience, but maybe there's other traditional examples that.
Well, what Ram Dass said, I agree with. It's not that we want too much, it's that we don't want enough. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is a lot of these goals that we have are still, the idea you can't solve a problem from the mm-hmm. frame of mind that you're in the problem in, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you can't solve desire from lack. Mm. So it can't be, in order to counter a sense of lack, it has to be, a totally nonlinear experience of what do I actually desire unconditionally? If there were no conditions, what would I desire? So then just say you get to freedom, mm-hmm. right? So you have these high abstract words. So you have to say, what does freedom look like, smell like, taste like, feel like? And you have to begin to define it for yourself. Then you work backward. And at that point, you might actually decide being an attorney does not look like it's going to lead me here, even though it sells that it will. Mm-hmm. So that's what, and then there aren't that many, and then the other really interesting thing, if you want to look at what most people want, which is happiness mm-hmm. and a lack of suffering, then what they found scientifically even, science is usually behind the mm-hmm. behind the times with these things, mm-hmm. is that altruism is what brings the greatest happiness. Mm-hmm. So the issue is that we've made altruism. I think you might have my phone. Isn't it? We've made altruism morality, an element of morality, rather than something that's just functional, that mm-hmm. brings you to happiness. Does that mm-hmm. make sense? So then people are like, they feel like they can choose whether or not they want to be moral, what they perceive as moral, mm-hmm. by being altruistic, and that they can still be happy. Mm-hmm. You can't. No, in the recipe for happiness is altruism. Mm-hmm. So then, in fact, it's the top one, right? Mm-hmm. Compassion and altruism are the top thing. That you could be dead ass broke. Nobody could know your mm-hmm. name. You could mm-hmm. be living in Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. If you look at some of the writings from right, mm-hmm. then what they found is the primary true north for the people who were able to keep their sanity, in the most abhorrent, mm-hmm. Experience, and one of them in human history, is that they put their consciousness on a plane of compassion. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, that's how you work productively, and because otherwise you're down here in the samsara stew, mm-hmm. right? Of like, this is what I want, and this is what I can get, mm-hmm. And you kind of do. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know some attorneys who have financial security, who mm-hmm. have a certain sense of worldly significance. Mm-hmm. But I have yet to meet an attorney, and I have met many now. many, mm-hmm. who's happy.
I see. Yeah, I guess if you can say, well, evolve from this is what I want to this is what I want to contribute, possibly, then that creates a certain meaning for sacrifice. In the sense, brilliant. Yeah, in the sense that, like, who would I have to become to be able to contribute this much? And if it happens to be attorney, if it happens to be preacher, if it happens to be skateboarder or whatever, but I do think it's the framework, right? So you're not going out and saying, "Oh, don't get all these things, don't do any of these things."
No, that's great.
But why do that is the question. To do anything, because I mean, I think that's kind of, and I think though, but I'm wondering whether we can prescribe these things, because I feel like the learned experience of climbing up this wall, which you call samsara, I guess, is valuable too, in the sense that it teaches you what you don't want.
Without question.
It teaches you what not to do, or maybe how not to approach things. And it also may give you room for reflection about your approach and why you're doing it. I mean, obviously, if you're honest with yourself.
I think that that's really sophisticated thinking, in that most people don't hear that you can do whatever you want. The why is what transforms it into whether or not it gets you to your destination or not.
Mhm.
That's really vital. So I like that idea that yeah, you can be a lawyer, and provided that you have this intention behind it, then you can use your natural gifts and skills,
Mhm.
and that's what turns it, to my mind, into a creative act
Mhm.
rather than a production act, because production will never bring you to sustainable happiness.
Mhm.
So that's number one. And then what did you say after that? It was so good.
That I'm not sure if we can just prescribe the path, and that like, don't we have to learn from our
You do.
from our mistakes and our, or from the path? Let's not even call them mistakes.
Well,
but
I think you have to have both. This is, I mean, because I know plenty of people who don't have a very strong experience guru. And what that, and, that internal guru that learns from their mistakes. I know plenty of people who do not have a good relationship with that guru. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, intimately.
And so I think you need both. What you need, or what I needed a set of principles that I could wear like a loose garment, that I understood when I got lost, okay, there, because I wouldn't hear it the first 1,000 times. You don't hear it. And so I'm incredibly fortunate in that the people who've served as guides in my life said, you have to be you. Like the Jesus joke, when St. Peter got to the pearly gates, God didn't say, why weren't you more like Jesus? He said, why weren't you more like St. Peter? And so like that's the calling. That's what you have to do. The whole task is to become who you are. In my mind, that's the whole thing. There's nothing else. So you have to do that. You have to make those mistakes, but you also need to be carrying around a compass that keeps aiming toward true north. What's true north? It is the ultimate liberation, the ultimate sense of freedom from and freedom to, right? So you have to be able to find that. Oh, okay. So then you can say to yourself, okay, I feel like shit. Have my acts lately been compassionate? Have I been returning the onus of responsibility back to myself? Just like basic spiritual tenets or principles or axioms that you can move by, but that are broad enough that they don't determine the content. I think we have to discover the content. I think fundamentally our hardwiring knows the principles.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of that, for example, in ancient Egyptian mythology, you would get to the gates or whatever it was called, and they would make you, or they would ask you things, and you would have to make 42 negative confessions, like, have you coveted your neighbor's wife? No. Have you, committed acts of murder? No. And so it was more about what you didn't do than what you did. And I think, that
it sounds like an insurance company.
right. It does. Yeah. Did you not go over 80 miles an hour? So I'm just saying, like, sometimes, the thing is like, okay, what did you achieve your heart's desire? Okay, maybe not. However, what I was able to do is to alleviate suffering. So that would be not make people suffer, not make myself suffer, right? So in a sense, that's kind of like what I didn't do. I didn't incur additional suffering. And I think the older, at least I get, the more I appreciate what I don't do, rather than what I'm seeking to achieve, because I feel like that kind of just clears the path a bit and says, hey, well, okay, so if these things are off the table, what's available? And that tends to be the path.
Yeah, I don't know about that. And I mean, obviously I'm at a point in my life where I would probably appreciate not having done things. But I don't. I think I'm
not saying regret what you've done necessarily. I'm just saying like clear a path for like what's not going to be done now.
Well, what I'm saying is, so I come from a tradition in Zen, just basic Mahayana, and somebody described Vajrayana as Zen plus power, but the idea, much of Zen is defined as Buddhism in many ways up until you hit Vajrayana is a negative belief system. Is what you don't do, what you restrain, and what I discovered is that doesn't have enough power to break you through the membrane into freedom. And so there does come a point for all of us, I had my point, where it looks wise. Renunciation looks wise. And it's actually the opposite, I think. I think it's right when renunciation, this is me, you should know, right when renunciation looks wise, the aim should be full bore. Go abet. In alchemy, it's called abet, abetting the issue, because you want to exhaust that karma. You want to go as hard as you can. And that is where, where I think you hit freedom, where you go right in that moment when you just want to, the world isn't safe, people are mean. Turn it up as high as you possibly can. And that's where I think the profound shift happens. That to me, and I use Vajrayana as the metaphor of what happens, because Vajrayana is the anything goes level,
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think that I have been forced to make that shift just personally, but I have heard you talk about in the past situation that you can't shrink from. You're stuck in the room essentially, right? So, for example, let's just say that you're accused of a crime, and so the natural response is to renounce everything. Like, I did not do this. I did not do that. I did not do that. And so you find yourself just kind of like backpedaling, maybe until there's no room to backpedal anymore. And then you have to kind of confront, well, I did do this, and this is what I stand for, and this is what I do. And then maybe that is a point in life. And maybe not everyone is demanded to do that. And maybe some people are prepared to do that. Or what do you think about that?
I think you hit the point where I think what a midlife crisis is, I think all of these, those kind of periods of existential grief or ennui are rooted in that you have undigested consequences. And those undigested consequences of your actions are now your experience guru. They are your teacher. And unfortunately, I think it's very unfortunate that what we're given as guidance or a spiritual principle at that point is either, go out and get a red Lamborghini, go out and practice samsara harder with, greed and consumption, or it's to withdraw into a, we'll say a retirement world and just start closing down shop. Those are sort of the two instructions that we're given, rather than sift through all of these consequences and then look at them and say, this is my lesson for where a human being acts naturally and has suffered consequences. And then you can sense where reality, where the constructed reality is out of alignment with truth. Then that becomes your cause. For example, I experienced some difficulties around, I would say the crux of it was the ideas that are projected onto a woman who's sexual and who promote sexuality as the premier source of everything: awakening, healing, connection, social justice, right? And the ideas are, both that you're evil and you're dumb. You're dumb and evil. And they're all like that too, where you're like, how did those two go together? Wouldn't you have to be smart? But so then it hit me. So I could either, and what the the shaman and the wounded person are brought down by the same forces. The shaman is the one who makes it out. So to be brought down by those forces, and then to say, okay, not making that out means withdrawing into shame, or all of the things that somebody does in the scarlet letter world, we'll say, right? Apologizing, fawning, pleading for permission to exist on this planet as this wounded, dark person, or it's to do what my tendency is to do, and that's like, hey, we're going to change the narrative on this one. You got that one wrong. I didn't. It's just that I got locked in the narrative. We have to begin to change that, and that becomes your life's work. That's where, and that's where the meaning comes in, that makes even the most hideous work, because it's not fun. You're sitting there and you're like, wow, I'm really being projected onto as I talk to this person. It's happening. But the meaning comes in that you now have suffered personally this undharmic experience that is in the culture, and so that becomes your cause. And so it's very personal and it's very universal at the same time, and that's then it has the span to bring you all the way to freedom.
Got it. No, it's interesting. I just wanted to touch on that phrase that you use when you're reached a point in life where someone's accusing you of, one, being a moron, and two, an evil genius at the same time. It's kind of like, that's kind of where that has to be an inflection point, right? Of some sort, right? Okay, both can't possibly be true.
Right.
So there's a schism, there's a wrinkle in the matrix. What's really going on, right? Am I completely deluded?
Right.
Or am I sort of losing the illusion, right? And because I feel like it's very comfortable to live in an illusion. In fact, they used to use the term in ancient England, beyond the pale, right? Which is like, people will be living some kind of village or something like that, and out in the woods, beyond where they usually go, it's really misty. So no one wanted to go beyond the pale. Yeah. Right.
That's some good stuff.
No one wanted to go beyond the pale. And if you went beyond the pale, then possibly you're a witch, possibly you'd get lost, possibly you'd die. But it was only by going beyond the pale that any sort of like knowledge or, sort of objective reality, was obtained. And so maybe you take on that identity of someone who's going to go beyond the pale. But it seems like you would have to be prepared for that, emotionally, spiritually,
Nobody
or maybe
is
compelled to it.
I don't think anybody is. I think that's one of the great illusions, is that you could be. You can't. You can have. I do live on some muscle memory from years of practice, and I'm Sicilian. Those two things really what has me laughing today. And I had really profound relationships, which I would suggest for anybody. I kept stage diving and getting caught and lifted. Okay. But I think that's what you're describing so well. I would like to actually capture that, is what is being asked of each of us. And because you have to leave this paradox, right? All paradox resolves in the depth, right? So I'm a bimbo, but an evil,
genius IQ bimbo.
Wicked, and that's where that's where, for example, you as a Black man live constantly, right?
Well, I mean, it's so funny because like I don't necessarily see myself all the time. So I forget I'm Black unless someone says something about it.
Right. But so, you can, what I mean is the projection that you live in.
The projection
is this really strange split of who you're supposed to be. It's an unresolved, not whole vision of you as a full, whole human being, uniquely as you are.
Right. And that can create a certain amount of ambivalence, and does, I think, in the majority of people who are sort of like living under that paradigm. Right. I just feel like I just had parents who never, taught us to live ambivalently. I mean, we understood what the ambivalence was, but I think that there was either an opening society or maybe my upbringing that, I'm proud of being Black. Yeah. On the other hand, like, I don't necessarily need to live in that identity at all moments of the day.
See, that's
it's
that is in Buddhism, it's called Vajra pride, where you have a basic fundamental pride in being Black, but you don't need to live in that identity of your pride all the time.
Right.
That's how to my mind, there's been resolution. So then what I would imagine is that your parents went beyond the pale.
They did. Yeah.
To find resolution, to find where these opposites merged, and then to have their identity rooted there, and then to give all of you that identity coming forward.
Well, I also think that there were societal factors. I mean, obviously there was an opening up in society that I think my parents were right on the cusp of, that sort of gave them both this sort of pre-opening experience and this post-opening experience. And speaking of which, like when we're talking about times like now that appear to be extremely disruptive, and I think we talked about this the last time, what are the opportunities for playing with one's own identity in this era? Like, what does conservative mean? What does left mean? What does right mean? What do races mean? Like, what are these things now that we can, because I feel like when you have sort of like a destruction of an edifice, and you talk about this thesis, antithesis, and then this period of new synthesis, I think that's kind of where we are now. Like the thesis and antithesis have already clashed.
We are in the collision.
We're in the collision.
Without question.
So then that collision creates really interesting permutations that are available to people about identity, perspective, these type of things. And like, I'm slowly getting my head out of the sand as we discussed. And so one of the opportunities might be to kind of like, okay, well, let's play with this. Like, how can what are the new things that exist, or what are the opportunities for identity or non-identity in this? And I think with women, that's one thing. African Americans, obviously, there's some of that opportunity.
Why do you say some and not a tremendous amount?
Well, I'm not trying to overly qualify it. I'm just saying that there's opportunity. I think there is what we are. I used to tell my parents all the time, like, I wish I lived in the 60s with you guys. And then I'm like, no, this is more interesting.
For sure. I mean, because to my mind,
at least as interesting.
This is the time. This is the era of the marginalized. This is it would be, although it sounds like the great white hope, but it is the great opportunity, the time of the great opportunity for real liberation, because nothing has definition anymore. Words have kind of left their meanings at this point. Like, no, you're using that word in a way that it isn't what it is, or so each one of us is brought to a place where you get to uniquely and originally define yourself out of the contained definitions that have existed for two reasons. I think we talked about one, because it won't matter with AI.
Okay.
Yesterday I was talking to Maya. They had this funny, it was like a make yourself it was a story about how porn is turning into AI. They're starting to have
like AI
avatars for like OnlyFans now. I thought it was so interesting. And so they were talking about the app that they use. So Maya is our in-house AI whiz. And so I sent it to her, and she sent me back. She just played with it for like 5 minutes. And she sent me back this, like, it wasn't naked. This Maya AI that was like, you wanted to have sex with this Maya AI. It was like, it was so hot. So, oh my gosh, there we go. Look at that.
Oh, wow.
There you go. And so
one of the aspects is AI that's going to help us play with identity.
Right. Because one of the elements of the story was that it was a guy being a woman. and a very hot woman this guy was being. And so all of a sudden, man, woman, black, white, these things aren't going to have the same significance in terms of what they've had significance for, which is access and monetary reward, right? So then what happens to those things?
I mean, they become artifacts in some sense. I mean, just like, I mean, there's people with the last name Carpenter, I guess, who've never, you know, banged a nail into any wood.
Oh, I thought they were Christian.
Well, right, exactly. So yeah, so I think they become artifacts. They become historically significant, but do they, you know, maintain as much salience in this? Who was talking about their last name? Was it Matt Pelletier? And I got a whole etymology of the word Pelletier, and it was, you know, it was adventurous. So it started with Daniel Boone and fur trapping and Canada, and I was like, wow, like I never would have even thought, you know, there was so much behind that name. So I think that those are still interesting cultural artifacts. But now we're saying, okay, so what's the new cultural lingua
What is
franca?
the new organizing factor for identity? And I think it's moving out of the world of appearances and the world of what your production is for. Both of those things won't be your primary identifiers. And I believe your identity will be based on your genius. What is uniquely you? So then you have to figure out what is uniquely you. And that's where you can no longer go along party lines. You can no longer go with your in group. Like it's like my identity. It's funny because you said something about I help women or whatever. No, I don't even care about women. It has nothing to do with women more than it has to do with men. It has to do with the fact that if you don't say everything I'm saying is for women, then the women won't listen, and men always listen. So there you go.
Right.
It's like I could say this is for women, and men will listen just as much as they ever did. They're thrilled to hear this information. So they're so sweet. You don't have to do that. So I think what's going to happen then is all of a sudden people are going to have to know what they desire and what turns them on, because that will be what defines you. And you're going to have to be turned on because your mind is going to have to operate outside the pale.
Right.
Because you're going to have infinite possibility at your hands. You know, anybody who has worked with AI will know. You ask the first question, then it doesn't quite give you the right answer. And now most women, if we ask men a question, they don't give us the right answer. We just get mad and we go on strike, right? But now you can just keep asking more questions and AI is going to keep getting more and more sophisticated. So as far out as you can possibly conceive, now there's going to be something there to meet you. And offer and play with you and expand your vision and your dreams.
See, I thought you were going to take the tack that, okay, being self-powered, right, is a new sort of industrial capacity, right? It's a human industrial capacity. So before now, we needed large systems to provide us with power, electricity, gasoline. You know, these are very extractive. They require centralized organization. They require centralized political organization. But in an age in which maybe, you know, you can be self-powered, do you even need a political organization? Does anything centralized really make sense in this environment? And can we arrive at a truth in a much more efficient way that's less pollutive, like politically, socially, and environmentally? And then just maybe, you know, more adaptive than we've done it in the past. And isn't that just progress, or, you know, where are we?
I don't know. I see, to me, progress has a linear definition and we are in a non-linear turn. And so I think we are in the total destruction before the arising. And it doesn't, it's so funny. I read so many, like people the reasons people ascribe to what's happening.
Mhm.
And they're so intelligent, really,
Oh, right.
really smart people are saying why things are the way they are.
Understood.
But I don't see any of them going deep enough. Like, no, we're being propelled into absolute, total, complete destruction. We're being propelled into our own 5-MeO DMT death trip in order to enter the really cool realms. That nobody makes it there. I've heard some, like, I love these, the ideas about it being about what we talked about, where everything is privatized, or
right.
but like that's not it. That's not what's happening. And so you're going to be buoyed about until you understand really what's happening and you get the bigger picture. Then you can kind of surf a lot of these crazinesses,
right?
Because it's important to stay present and surf them. Like you can't put your head in the sand.
right.
You have to be like, no, actually, right now in this moment, people are being hurt, and that matters on the way to our death. We want everyone to have as pleasurable possible palliative care in our dying process. Right? We don't want people just left in a hospital room just moaning and crying and dying. We actually want the process where we all go together. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. That process, I guess, of dying, and I guess metaphorically and physically, being a precursor to sort of new life or a new form of being is something that I don't think any of us want to confront. And that's why we invent these narratives. We need the narrative, right? to cling on.
Narrative. I want to be mad.
Right. Or we
sad or happy.
Or at least need a story that we tell ourselves, or that, is comforting in some kind of way about what's happening. But I do think and I think it's a natural instinct for human beings to create a narrative out of experience, right? I think storytelling, communication, sitting around the campfire with, something that sort of like makes sense of things is a natural human instinct. But maybe there's a point in which you suspend narrative for a while and sort of like go with it and say, okay, let's we need to put our eyes on the prize here rather than just sit back and recount what we think is happening. Maybe that's an exercise that we can have an opportunity to engage in.
I was just reading a story about someone who in Japan, I think I talked about this perhaps. There's this monk that sits with people as they're dying or when they feel suicidal. And so he's just in the world of death constantly. And so somebody was talking about him because I'm fascinated with his story. There's a documentary about it. And they were saying, but what's happened is we've lost religion. He still has the Zen belief system, but we've lost religion, and religion is created to organize our minds in order to confront the mystery. And so we don't have the organizing principles to actually be with this huge mystery that's happening. And so it's like it's literally like having a family member that's dying, but the whole family's bickering and doing all of these things, and nobody's actually taking care of the dying person because we can't confront it. And so there's a way that the process could be just stunning. It could be a really beautiful process to move into and through this, but acceptance is the answer to all of our prayers, and we don't have acceptance. We haven't begun to even look at it. I talk to people who are still in the mindset of, fighting AI. It's like, okay, good luck on that one.
Right. Acceptance is the answer to all prayers. That is a very simple but effective framework, I think, for, and it presumes a certain, both self-nobility as well as nobility of the divine, in the sense that, like,
your parents did great.
No.
I love your parents.
Yeah, yours did too.
They really.
Yeah. So we arrive at where we arrive at through, and I don't mean to paint it as an idyllic environment. As I said, we had weird cheese and everything.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I feel like the opportunity then to meet somewhere on the road and say, okay, here's what it looks like, right?
Right.
I think we had, so religion has changed, obviously. So, if you go back to the Greeks, I mean, everyone believed the things were fated, and all you had to do was consult the gods about what your fate was, and that would make you more adapted to life. And then I think Christianity sort of came and said, well, no, I mean, it's not, you have opportunity to dictate your fate if you pursue life in a certain way and obey these edicts, right? And now I think we're sort of like shedding that skin in whatever the new religions are. And they'll probably look a little bit like the old religions. They'll still be called Christianity. They'll still be called Buddhism. They'll still be called other things. But then because you have the quanta of knowledge, I didn't realize that the book that Sean Wall was quoting from was like 12 times the size of the Bible. So, so I had to I was like, you know what, I'm not going to be able to skim this.
One moment, I just want to say, John Perry Barlow wrote a Declaration of Independence for the internet world. Let's start with that next week, as we're talking about religion. And it's not, I always believe the next Buddha will be the Sangha, the next Messiah, the next chosen one will be the world connected, people connected. And so I think you're right. Something is forming, but I want to say, I want to refer to something you said, because you said, believe you're fated, then believe you have to work toward your fate. And then, the next iteration would be karma, that you have certain karmas that you move with. And I don't think we've ever had this is one of those places where I don't think that we've had a big enough vision of what it is where it's none of that. It is, I don't necessarily, I can't legally recommend that people do psychedelics, but I can recommend that you read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan.
Okay.
And any book on 5-MeO-DMT, any Terence McKenna that you possibly can, because it gives you an idea of they're just being this that you call you being consciousness that is having experience that it's not identified with. And then when that happens, all of this just becomes so fate and karma and all of that just becomes cumbersome. And that's where I think we're headed.
It's interesting because I feel like Christos in Harlem is much different than Christos on the land. And I'm wondering which one is the real Christos. And
Same
so, no. And so and so I know, and it comes from two things, right? The majority of conversations I've had, very few with him, with Christos. He's kind of this urbane guy walking through the woods, hey, how you doing? And, knew very little of his story. So then I come upon him in Harlem today, and he's talking about, oh, everyone's smoking weed here. And I used to work in Harlem on 140th Street. I'm like, wait, who is this guy? Right. And so maybe there is a certain way that we can access ourselves and each other by appreciating this experience, these experiences that we're having. And I'm wondering, I'm going to ask him after the talk, does he feel like the same person in Harlem as he does in the land? And maybe other people too, who, because those are vastly different environments, at least topographically, right? But, they're available, right? You can live that life and then 4 hours later be here with the guy smoking weed in the vestibule, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think, in a funny way, you're saying very much what I've been talking about this week. And, the place where, all you are is awareness, and it's located everywhere. And why would it ever be that it's only centralized here and you only have to focus on it here? Why can't I focus on the awareness that is me over here in this body and have all of the experiences? There's no reason for that other than what we believe is possible. And so then how do you open and expand that skillfully so that it doesn't freak people out, as we were talking about? So then we'll dial it way back and talk about the fact of how do we go into this process as a family, facing something unlike humanity has ever faced before. And how do we do that with care? My friend started Death Over Dinner in order to face the process of death with love and talk about the things that his family hadn't talked about as his father was dying. And everyone was left, with heavy grief because there was so much that was unresolved. How do we resolve everything prior to our transition?
I think with care. I mean, I think you did give the prescription, and like, going through a similar process myself, it can either exacerbate family differences or bring people together. And so the question is about like, how much do you really care, and how are you willing to handle this transition? That like, if you do it, it's better done with care. I mean, it's more, everyone kind of has their job, and, people sort of like, you do your hands-offs, and it does reduce, I guess, personal autonomy to some extent, but it aids in the overall mission, which is to like create sort of like family cohesion and love. And so all the personal foibles that maybe, annoy you about your brother, your sister, that you moved across the country to avoid, right? You then embrace, because you're like, okay, well, it's bigger than this, my personal preference at this point. So there's a lot of lessons there that we could take from that. And I think, obviously, if we start on that level, then I think we can get there politically as well, where, okay, we're going to take the death of institutions. How can we do it with care? Are we just going to just throw people out onto the street and say, oh, your job is no longer needed, fuck you? Or are we going to say, okay, we will sort of like take care of people as this thing transitions.
Right.
And I think we're going through a real wrestle about that.
Real wrestle.
Yeah, but ultimately, I think it'll be a little bit better than what at least it looks like to me right now.
Yeah, I mean, right now it looks heartless, and it looks devastating. And in Om, there's this expression called safe porting, and there's this idea that you can't safe port people enough. Even when you're driving them crazy. I think I've told the story here where I apologized to my mom so many times to ensure that if she passed or I passed, we would be resolved. That she said, "Please stop apologizing, or you'll owe me an apology." Like, stop. And there's a way that until I got that confirmation, I kept going. And I feel the same way about communicating. I do feel, I have to be honest, I have never had I follow this guy on Instagram. I follow all kinds of politicians, Senator Mullen, and he just comes on every day and talks to us about what's going on and what it means, and I've never written to a politician. I write to Senator Mullen, and I quite like that experience, but I feel like, there's a way that we can first of all, we have to get to the place where we tell people what's happening. I think, there are people who are doing risk assessment, and I don't think they're doing it quite right. I think they're like, we just have to make clear, decisive actions so that we can't get behind it, and they don't realize people's nervous systems, the effect on people's nervous systems, and the freeze, and unnecessary. I don't like unnecessary suffering, and there is unnecessary suffering, but I think it's just due to, here's what I think it's due to the presumption that people are too dumb to understand. And so it's almost like, no, we have to do this for them, they would never understand this. And I think if they used all of that time to just come on and say where we're headed and give the vision, the positive vision, by the way, then we could begin to cohere around something, because now it's just too fracturing, don't you think?
Well, I think that the people who are brave enough to see it, let alone embrace it, may not have the skill to come back and inform others about it in a skillful way. That was I think the whole point of the cave analogy was that, like, there was a bunch of people who had left the cave, like had reality. And like some of them could not adjust to the lack of light coming back in in order to get back into, warn everyone else. And others, were blinded by the light that they saw outside. And so it was only like one or two people who had the ability to live both inside and outside the cave. And that was kind of like the lesson there. But yeah, everyone who I see who has the courage, or most people I see who have the courage, or at least the perception and the courage to adapt, are not like your most, they don't have the best bedside manner that you'd
For
want.
sure. I mean, I'm one of those people.
Yes. Without a doubt. Hey, but you sometimes you have to make a trade-off.
And
right?
I learned to have bridges. People like you're one of my bridges where I download everything that I think, and then you say, you might not want to say that one.
Well, not in that way.
Let's say it this way. And then it comes back to me, and it's like, oh, that's what I meant. But other people understand it as well. And so there's,
or that's what I meant others to receive.
So I think there has to be a tier of people. I think that, quite frankly, I think that's the best use of Elon, is to begin to give insider forecasts to a government that is blind to AI about what's happening, and then have bridge people communicating to the world what's actually happening. So that they know why they're so panicked, other than the obvious fracturings.
Right, other than the obvious fracturings.
Yeah.
So I think to people who are sort of like futuristic and sort of like have already seen this happening and to a certain extent are adapting and participating, that requires a lot of energy and an extreme amount of willingness to kind of like trust your own insight and your own, sort of like sense of right and wrong. But when you're dealing with, and the inability to do that, especially if you're trying to turn around a ship of this size, like, can create its own problems.
That's right.
Even in the transition. So it's not just that people should be kinder or be willing to explain. It's like, if you don't, then the transition is going to be like bloody and you might not survive it, meaning even the people who are, aware of what's going on. And so,
No, that's why I think we should be the communications directors for this, because I think we are beautifully placed in that I think we see what they see, but I think we're also of the people. We love people, and so and I think that that's a really important marriage that has to happen in the communication of a radical transition in the world. You need both. You need both the absolute and the particulars, and those have to come in. So you have to both be considering, like, I watch a lot of dying videos. There's this video of this woman. She's a mother. She has 4 children. She has stage 4 cancer. She doesn't know where her children are going to go when she dies. And then how's she going to receive this piece of information, and then what impact will it have on our kids? What impact will it have on, my mother who doesn't, begin to understand but how do you get the communication out in such a way that people actually have that kind of, okay, at least I know where we're at. That's what we need. We don't have a you are here for people. And so everyone's just running around lost, having no idea where they're located. They can see different places they might want to get to, but they don't know where they are.
Right. And I think there's also people who are kind of in the realm of war is God. Yeah. Because like war decides things, right? Yeah. Like it provides a certain finality between the warring sides, right? But if you presume that both of the warring sides are the same individual or the same people, then you can't kill one without the other dying. Right? But
I agree with you.
But it's tempting to believe that war is God.
It's so tempting. It's in the same way that it's tempting to believe that problems are God. And so we feel so insecure about all of these changes that are happening, rather than practicing the wisdom of insecurity. We practice trying to weigh down, insecurity, things lift up, right? And so we try to weigh it down by putting problems on top of it. And so, all of these things are temporary solutions that we perceive as gods that only exacerbate the problem.
Right. Because I think momentary resolution that's forced, like, if you force the oppressed to like just swallow their oppression and say, hey, who cares? Like, you can't do anything about it. That does not produce justice.
No.
And, you know, it kind of suppresses the problem until something explodes.
Right. And I'm going to say the other counterpart, though, and that is that if you compel the oppressor to
bend to the will of the oppressed,
then you have the same issue. And this is what we don't like, is that it requires intimacy. All of this requires intimacy in a world of people who don't know how to have intimacy. So we don't know how to have intimacy with the death we're going through. We don't know how to have intimacy with each other. We don't, and so that, that's a big part of erotic justice, is developing the faculty for intimacy, because with that, you can heal it all.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's also true with writing and with narrative, is that, none of it works without some kind of teasing of opposites.
Right.
And the narrative itself doesn't work without some kind of resolution. And that resolution is often ironic, or and if you look at Shakespeare, I think, he ended things in a whole different way than like Aeschylus, or right. And so there was always some kind of lesson to be drawn from it, even with the most outrageous behavior by some of the protagonists and antagonists. You were never even sure, usually through the whole play, which was the protagonist or the antagonist, because that wasn't the point. I think he kind of like focused on. Yeah.
A great line. Yeah. Because that wasn't the point.
That wasn't the point. Yeah.
And that's why it's so nuanced and sophisticated. Keep going, because that's. If we could all get that, that's not the point, to figure out who's the protagonist or the antagonist.
Right. No, I think his whole point was that we're all movers here.
Yes.
There's no sort of like, and I think that dovetails with your sort of love of this infinite game concept, in that, the game doesn't have to end. In fact, the objective is for all of us to play.
That's the objective. That's it, exactly.
Thank you both so much.
Thank
wonderful. You. We're going to take a few reflections. So go ahead and raise your hand or send in a comment on the chat. And we will start today with Shannon.
We have fun.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just enjoyed today's talk so much. You both are so smart and thoughtful, and that's a combination that really works for me.
Oh.
And I wanted to say, when you guys were talking about acceptance, that really stayed with me, and I especially appreciated what Omari added about the nobility.
Yes, I did too. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Go to Hannah.
Hello. I loved this talk today, and I was just filled with this sense, because sometimes I think so many of like the disagreements are like people just using different, like they're not saying such a different thing as they are just using different language. And I felt like the overall sense of this talk from today was just like the process of translating something into all these different ways that different people can hear, and just how beautiful that is. And I was really touched by it.
Thank you.
Go to Hungye.
Hi.
Hello.
It's actually Thorfinn.
I know.
I just want to express some gratitude for these conversations, particularly the way we're looking at consciousness. This is the interdimensionality that you're always talking about, and using Buddha Dharma as a framework for understanding that. I think that's really beautiful and is really helpful. And I think as helpful as the psychedelics and stuff. So as a veteran who's had several labels of stuff like that, I've worked with all of these things, these modalities, but I find this very refreshing, the way the approach that you're taking, and I just want to have voice some gratitude to the whole Sangha, all the women and all the men that are now that are in this conversation, that are part of this whole thing in the multiple beautiful ways that it evolves. So I just want to express my gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Melody.
Hi, Nicole. I just want to express gratitude for the talks that you've been having recently and today. I find it really hard for me to articulate what I feel, but what I feel is like it's like you're speaking to something in me that understands. I might not like understand, but I'm like, I understand. And it feels I want to use the word hopeful. Like I feel hopeful that this reality that I've been, something in me has felt is a possibility, and you're transmitting that it is a possibility. And thank you.
Okay.
Kevin.
Mari, I love the
What do
way.
you mean, Omari?
My boy right there. My guy right there.
Don't worry, I'll get you both. There's a way that you have when Nicole will say something where you'll like catch onto it, like you're catching a ball that's moving fast and in flight. And Nicole talks about this, being able to look at things kaleidoscopically and turn them around and ask, is it true? Is it true through all time? Is it true for me? Is it true for everyone? And you have a way of doing that I've seen in your other work, that you just instantly take an idea and like pierce through it in 6 different ways and present this like beautiful kind of thoughts and questions and let it run off into different directions.
No, thank you. But I also feel like I get that from everyone as well. I mean, it's a dialogue. I wouldn't be able to sit alone and do this. Like it's, the subject matter alone is so well developed.
Yeah, but you're the master.
Right. But I do feel like, if someone supplies me the material, the tools, the halfway done product, then I can put a few threads into it.
Do you feel? Kevin, I think, see, you should have talked to me. You could have been dismissed by a woman instead of by a man. There you go.
But I mean, I usually take orders from Kevin, and it's usually almost always already done. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. I can fact check. I can spell check this. So.
Is it easy to? He is a master at deflection.
I see him do it.
That's who will be on our.
It doesn't matter how badly the ball is thrown. You still do it. So don't tell us what wonderful ball throwers we are. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
You catch any.
Right, and here's this is what I'm going to just say on that. Like this is where Vajra pride is, because I'm just going to say it to you. You aren't getting out of this one that easily, right? And that is, because I think in this world that we're visioning, each one of us has our absolute unique gift that only we can bring. And that is an absolute unique gift that only you bring. And so, but that doesn't mean that Courtney Lipofsky doesn't.
Right.
She has her unique, in fact, it's better if each of us acknowledges it, has reflection on it, owns it fully, and then grows into it and lives it. Whereas I think in the other world, I don't even know what other world there is, in the crappy ass world. Right. This sort of like humility is exalted.
Right.
Because the idea is that I'm enlightened and you aren't. No, you're enlightened, you're enlightened, you're enlightened. Each one of us uniquely in our own form. And so you are the bomb, Omari.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I want our group discussion reminds me of this, and also just the way that like, I feel like everyone serves each other, here, and like, okay, well, like, I'm like looking around like, is this your job or, but I think it's just the general attitude.
Yeah.
Is that, I think there was this Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, he wrote a brilliant book called Home in the World. And in one of the scenes, a guest of the house is asking the wife, like, you're just as professionally accomplished as your husband. Why is it that you like constantly wait on him hand and foot? And she says something like, and I don't have to quote, she says, true devotion never stands in the way of equality. It only raises the ground of meeting. And so I think that's where we complement each other. And yeah, maybe I'm somewhat dismissive of things, but I think true devotion doesn't stand in the way of equality.
See, he did it again. Okay, so next week we are going to start with John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Internet Independence. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but we'll bring it. We'll put it on the screen for folks. Everyone can have a copy. It's exquisite. It's just a good opener for a way we might view the world differently. Yeah, and you should know it does go a little hard on the liberal end, but. But we can make adjustments. Omari will make those adjustments because he gets really freaked out when it gets too liberal. So we'll bring it back.
Right.